step number one is align on expectations. Step number two is to try to align closely in fitness level. And then step number three is to like drive your fitness level up, because even though there are a lot of team and synchronized aspects to Team of Four, you can't overcome a lack of fitness with teamwork. You have to have the barrier to entry. You have to be able to do things that, a semifinal athlete would be able to do to play there.
The fitness movement is brought to you by ZOAR Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, ZOARFitness.com. Today, I sit down with ZOAR Fitness Coach Chris Hardenberg, and we talk about training for CrossFit teams. This is something that I personally want to learn more about, and Chris has a lot of experience in this area, so it's actually an opportunity for me to learn, and I hope you can get something out of it by listening along. I started off by asking Chris what his experience is in CrossFit with teams.
So personally, as an athlete on a team, I've been doing some level of team, and just to frame this conversation, when we say team, we're going to say team of four, right? Not like partner competitions or team of three necessarily, because team of four, in my opinion, is kind of what maps into what's considered the main CrossFit season.
Yeah.
And so I would say, I've kind of done some sort of team, competing and working as a team back into like 2017, probably. Maybe let's call it 2018. And so I've competed locally on a team of four. I've competed at Wadapalooza on a team of four. We competed at a Mid-Atlantic competition as a team of four, quarterfinals on a team of four. So I would say at a bunch of different levels, right? Never at the highest level, but at a myriad or cornucopia, being that it's almost Thanksgiving, a cornucopia of team levels as an athlete. As a coach, I've coached also people who have participated in team. Fortunately for me, I've coached athletes who are on a team with me as well, which makes programming way easier. And very similar levels. Nothing all the way to like a semifinal or games level yet, but everything underneath that.
Cool. Yeah. So to be honest, I'm just kind of like curious, just because, I think potentially as my career continues to develop as an athlete and as a coach, like I think likely I might get to experience both ends of it, but sure. I feel like it's a good likelihood that I will probably coach somebody on a team at some point. And I have not done the coaching in the capacity that you're talking about, where it's more formal. It's like the game seasons, the team of four. Like I've done plenty of stuff that's like partner comps, teams of three, like male on male, female type RX competitions. Like,
sure,
that's just an entirely different boat in my opinion. And it's just like that environment tends to be pretty relaxed. The people who are like individual competitors who they're like, hey, I'm going to, throw down on this weekend. We're going to put some buddies together. And like, even if they take like maybe a couple weeks to prep for or something, it's still just a different feel than saying like, hey, we're going team. And like, this is sort of our focus for, this season or for the next couple seasons or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, for most people who are, I'll say at least average to above average CrossFit athletes who are engaging in like a weekend partner competition, like you could iron out a decent number of like synchronized movements that you'll most likely see in a local setting. And like, honestly,
toes to bar and bar facing burpees.
Yeah, it's like literally like a session or two. You can kind of iron that out, right?
Yep.
Because it's two people. You're most likely going to know the workouts ahead of time. And there's only so much you can do at a local competition, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to team of four, and again, with more, I think you said structure and kind of in terms of like the season, there's a lot of things that could come into play, a lot more, I should say.
Yeah.
And so who's going to partner with who, and some workouts that are split, how are you going to break certain reps up, who's good at what movement, not good at the other movement, how can I pick you up here where you pick me up over here? If you get deep enough into the season, or you have a competition that is well equipped. How do you handle things like implements like the worm and work together 4 at a time? So there's way more communication and teamwork and synchronization that comes into place on a team of 4 versus, like you said, just a local level team of 2, even team of 3. Rarely in competition do they do like 3 people syncing at one time. And when they do, like Wadapalooza has done it before, but a lot of the times it's like in a straight line. And so like one person can see all like the other 2
everybody
people.
else. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, again, figuring that out does not take long. So yeah, the team of 4 is a whole separate animal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's super interesting because especially when you get to, semifinal games level for the team of 4, it's like you can, and especially when you go to another competition like the games where you got like many more events where you can kind of play and like have a venue. For example, like you can be doing a relay race type event. You can be doing a females work and then males work, or, all these different combinations of things that you could do because you don't have like 3 tests where you need everybody to be like testing all the things, right? It just kind of like widens the array of the things that you could test, which makes it more fun for the athletes, but also makes it more challenging to kind of organize for as like an athlete and as a coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I have a few points of like questions like that I have stuff for. So my first one is just sort of like, thinking about the challenges as an athlete or a coach is like organizing the training for, obviously like all these different people who might not share the same schedule. They may or may not share the same facility. They may or may not share the same coach. And they have all like, they might not even be having the same number of sessions in a week. Like there's a lot of things that all go into that. So how often, or I should say like, are there teams, let me just say this. How common is it that like people are training together year round right now in 2022?
I mean, I think a lot of it depends on for lack of a better term, the seriousness of the team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, that's fair.
Like if it's the team legitimately looking to make it to like semifinals, games level, they're probably training together like most of the year.
Yeah.
Now training together
is loosely defined. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing team workouts all the time, right?
Yeah.
But you're probably working out together at a minimum because,
you're saying like alongside of each other at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because a lot of that builds camaraderie. And then when you can link up all 4 together, it's like, all right, let's hit a team workout because like you said, there's going to be differing schedules and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But a lot of that comes with team formation, right? Team can be super fun. It can also be super stressful.
Yeah.
And a lot of that just comes down to the tough part is trying to get linked up with people that are of similar skill level and similar commitments. The last thing you want is someone who's ultra committed to whatever team event you're signing up for, and the other person, like you said, different sessions and stuff like that. Like linking up on a team with someone like that wouldn't make sense, right? Because if I'm training once a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and I'm on a team with someone who,
super gung ho,
right, pulled me in because they want to go qualify for semifinals, but I can't. I'm like, oh, I can't make it to this team practice because my son's got this. I can't make it to this team session because I got a date or whatever. It's like
a priority mismatch.
Exactly. And then frustration ensues. And so that's the very first thing is trying to find people who are of, generally right of similar skill level. But even more so than that, aligned expectations.
I feel like there's maybe this is just my experience. Oftentimes in teams, it's like, okay, we have 2 people, we have 3 people, and it's like, all right, who's going to be our last female or who's going to be our last guy? And it's like
generally the female, unfortunately.
Yeah. I didn't want to stereotype too much, but that's often the case where it's like, and I think again, as the sport matures, I think this is slowly changing, but I still think it's the case where it's like somebody ends up getting roped into doing it who is maybe slightly underqualified, or their priority, they hold it as a slightly lower priority, even if they are qualified. And then it's like exactly what you're saying. Like 3 of the people are super gung ho and this other person feels like they're along for the ride. and it's like they're getting drugged basically the whole time, and it's like that's not a fun place to be.
No, it's not. And like I said, it's when you're on a team of 4, you have to do some workouts with 4 people in it, right? Like there's ways throughout the year, assuming that you're like, okay, I've linked up with 3 other people and I'm going team this year, right? And I'm going to take this entire calendar year to train myself, obviously, but then we're going to do team workouts, right? You can get some good work in where it's like, okay, at least me and you are here. Let's do a sync workout, or you know what I mean? But if you're going to do that basically the whole year and you're like be doing all 4 once or twice, you're going to be behind the 8 ball for a team that is training like that together all year. Now, that doesn't mean that the team of 4 who's been training together all year is going to be ahead of a team that has a much greater fitness level than them, right? And I think that's another, hole people can fall in is, like I said, step number 1 is align on expectations. Step number 2 is to try to align closely in fitness level. And then step number 3 is to like drive your fitness level up, because even though there are a lot of team and synchronized aspects to team of 4, you can't overcome a lack of fitness with teamwork. You have to have the barrier to entry. You have to be able to do things that, a semifinal athlete would be able to do to play there.
Yeah. You have to be able to string 10 muscle ups with like holding a ring support for 5 seconds in between each one.
Right. And it's like, you don't have to, like, there are plenty of teams that are really good. A great example is we had one from our gym that competed at a semifinal a couple of years ago, and it was really close to qualifying for the games. And that particular year, I don't know if any one of them would have qualified as an individual in the semifinals, but as a team, they were dynamite. And a lot of it was because their strengths and weaknesses puzzle pieced each other really well. They communicated really, really well. A lot of their communication was done without even talking. Like they had ironed a lot of that out. But again, they were super fit. So it was like, it wasn't like they were making up for a lack of fitness.
Yeah. The communication becomes way easier when everyone is just like, for example, like smooth with whatever movement. And it's like, everybody just does the movement and you sync up. It's like way easier versus like if you have someone who's starting to fall apart on X movement, it's like all of a sudden that becomes way harder to figure out.
Right.
Cool. Let's talk about like balancing individual and like team priorities. So in other words, like you're going to have people who have, an individual weakness. So for example, like say you or I are on a team, right? We should probably be squatting heavy
a lot
frequently. Yeah. And there might be someone else who that's like their bread and butter, right? So like, obviously there might be a mismatch there, but then you also like are going to need to come together and like work on stuff as a team where you maybe have stuff that, that, hey, we're not great in this type of a workout. Maybe it's a super long cyclical thing. We're not great at it. Right. So obviously that's going to maybe change throughout the season. So give me maybe a scenario of like, how might you balance that? And you can maybe take the coach's perspective on this.
Sure.
How might you balance individual and team priorities further away from competition and then as competition approaches?
Yeah. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. So if I'm coaching a team and you have 4 people with 4 different priorities when it comes to training, right? Step 1 is where are you in the season, right? And so if you're a ways away, you're probably fine trying to link up once every other week, because a lot of what you're looking to do is having to work on individual strengths and weaknesses. As you get closer to that competition, you have to be able to do more. And some people are super lucky where, you might have 4 coaches at your gym who are on the team. That's going to be way easier to link up schedules. And then what you can do is, make, just as a broad example, let's say you're training Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, right? You could easily say, okay, hey, Monday and Friday definitely are our individual priority days, because those are days following rest days, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe we try to link up and do a team workout every Saturday.
More MetCon based.
Yeah, we just throw down on a Saturday. We work on movement specific that we need to work on. And then as you get closer to game day, maybe it's like, okay, hey, we're going to do that every Wednesday. And Saturday. And then, okay, we're even closer now. The team stuff becomes more of a priority, right? And so maybe we do our gymnastic skill or our strength that are specific to us on Monday and Friday, and then we hit our MetCons, right? Now, I painted a scenario that doesn't often exist. So, right? So the other way to look at it is, like I said, regardless of where are you in the season, and then as you get closer, okay, we got to do more team stuff. What are our schedules, right? And this becomes the tough part of team is if the team competition is going to be what you do, those team training sessions have to become your priority, and you have to work your individual priority training around when people's schedules fit, right? And so generally it might be like, okay, for me and you know, I might be like, all right, hey, you know, I'm going through a back squat cycle right now, let's just say. And it's like, all right, I want to squat on Mondays. You know, that's usually a day I feel good or whatever. Right. But all of a sudden it's like, oh,
that's when I'm free.
Yeah. The only time you're free to train is Monday. And so I might just say, all right, you know what? I'm going to leave Monday open. We're going to do team training. And then basically loosely say, these are my priorities during this training block, and I'm going to fit them in based around what makes sense in that team training session. Right. And so if back squat is my priority, and let's say I do we do just thrash our legs on Monday.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
The scenario is like 150 like worm thrusters for time, and you got back squats the next day, and like someone else's coach programmed your team stuff, and now you're like, okay.
Exactly. So what I would do in that scenario is you have to be flexible to say like, okay, it's probably better if I squatted on like a Wednesday or a Friday at that point, and you kind of move things around.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the tough part of the team is you have to be flexible on that and be really clear on what are my priorities, so that when things get moved because of people's schedules, you can shed the things that maybe aren't a priority and hold true to what you need to train, and then just be flexible on what days you do it. And so that's kind of the more common scenario is the conversation of schedules. And you also have a conversation like the four people will be like, okay, hey, I really want to hit X today. They might say like, you know, I have snatch work. Can we do some strength work before our team session? And then if that's the case, it's like, okay, well, let me put my stuff in there. Right.
Yeah.
But yes, again, when under normal circumstances with normal people who have differing schedules, you have to work around the schedule and kind of adjust training around that as you get closer, I should say, to the competition for sure.
Yeah. And I guess like, for example, if you have, say you have, you know, a coach and your team has, maybe they have someone writing the programming, it's a different coach. I feel like as long as they're maybe far enough in advance programmed out, like, you know, at least a week, for example, you could kind of look at it and be like, basically troubleshoot it and be like, well, you know, the scenario we just talked about, like a bunch of squats and a MetCon, and then you got to try to fit your squat priority work in. The strength stuff, it's like, well, okay, you just look at it ahead of time and just basically Tetris everything in. It's kind of what you're saying. Like you leave the team priority stuff in there because that's sort of set in stone based on people's schedules. And then you just try to figure out, hey, what makes sense in terms of like structure of my week. And that's just going to end up like changing almost every single week, which is, I mean, that's like probably the most challenging thing about it, is that there's not as much like set in stone, like structure to your individual priorities.
Right. And that's exactly it is. And I've had to deal with that as a coach, and, you know, it's tough sometimes. I would say in the beginning, when I first would coach team athletes, it was tough. And I think it was tough in the beginning because as someone who was newer to coaching, I was very, very ingrained in the structure. Like, well, this is after the rest day. Like, you're supposed to do it this day. And I just learned over time that that's not necessarily how it works.
Yeah.
And you can't even really plan on when you're going to feel good. You know what I mean? And so, you know, there's sound principles, but then again, the human body often doesn't abide by those. And so, you know, I've had athletes all the time be like, hey, you know, I'm looking to link up with my team on this day. I'll be like, okay, cool. Let's do this on this day. Let's shift this around. You know, if you do a lot of hinging, you know, just skip this the next day. You're fine there. And then, it's just a simple conversation. And so if an athlete is willing to be flexible and communicate with their coach, it can get done. The coach just has to be ready and willing to kind of be on their toes with that and know truly what is the priority for that athlete throughout that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Because then at that point, you're kind of going from, it's training for the sport all the way into almost like practice for the sport. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, you have to do some of like the sport to a degree in order to be prepared for it. Right. Like if I played football, right, at some point I have to scrimmage in order to be prepared for game day. Right. Do I scrimmage all the time, every single practice? No, I'd be beat to crap. But at the same time, I do hit, let's say 4 or 5, let's say 4 scrimmages before the season starts. Mm-hmm. And so you got to be able to do those things.
That is a really funny point. This is totally off topic, but maybe not. But I think it's just so funny how, like, in any other sport, like, for example, we both wrestle, so we always go back to that. So it's like, imagine if you did no live wrestling and went and wrestled a tournament.
100%.
You would be absolutely destroyed. And the next day, well, even the same day, you would expect to be 100% destroyed and feel terrible doing it. Yeah. But people do that with CrossFit all the time. They're like, hey, I did this rotating EMOM and now I went and did this, competition or whatever. And it's like, man, that was awful. Like, yeah, you never did your sport. Like,
right.
You just practiced and then went and competed.
Right. And that's the thing that I think, unfortunately, I think the pendulum has come back, and I think people are starting to get it a little bit better. Because in the beginning, it was
all competing.
Exactly. Yeah. You thrust yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And from a wrestling perspective, Ben, imagine if we went live. Like, so for those that don't know, Ben and I wrestled in college, and I don't know if did they still do the grind practice while you were there?
Yep.
Was it while you were there was probably the last time they did that? I feel like.
Do they not do that anymore?
No, they don't. Because coach said
people got hurt all the time.
Yeah, they would get hurt. But anyways, the grind practice was basically an hour and a half practice. Sorry, my hamstring just cramped. Anyways,
you're tensing about it.
Thinking about the practice. So it was an hour and a half practice where you literally just went live the entire practice. You got partnered up with someone, whistle blew, you shook hands, and you said, all right, we're just going to beat the living hell out of each other for an hour and a half. And you came out of that like feeling terrible, right? Imagine if that was every day. We did that practice once a year. And it was during January where we had no matches. And so it was like a mental toughness exercise more than anything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like, in the beginning, it was like you basically did that every day. I'm going in for an hour. I'm just going to ram my head into a wall and compete and hope I bounce back the next day. And then at one point, I think when James Fitzgerald got big with, at the time it was OPT, then OPEX, their athletes were excelling. And it was because the pendulum swung back. So the pendulum swung back the other way. Like their whole thing was pacing and intervals, and which is great, right? That's how people, track athletes, swimming athletes, racing athletes get better in their sport, right? Is they do stuff like that. And so the pendulum swung back the other way. But you kind of want to settle somewhere in the middle, depending on where you are in the year, right? Like if you're super early, maybe you're doing competition style workouts, throwdowns once a week, once every other week. And then as you progress through the year, it's like, okay, now I'm doing it twice a week or whatever, really throwing down because it's like, I need to be prepared to actually engage in the sport. So yeah, it's like you have to be able to, to bring it back to the topic, from a team perspective, you have to be able to set time aside. And as you get closer to that competition date, that truly becomes the priority, no matter what someone's training priority is, because you have to be prepared to do the actual sport.
So let's say this is probably the scenario that is like, again, probably never happens. Probably won't ever happen in either of our careers, but say it's like sort of the ideal scenario, right? Like you're basically Rich Froning, right? Where you get to make your team, right? The schedule is whatever you want because you're all professional athletes, right? Like you can, coach them however you want. Like say it's your team and you're coaching them.
Sure.
What does sort of like the structure of training like potentially look like? Like, again, you kind of alluded to that you probably want them all training at the same times together, even when they're focusing on individual priorities. Like what kind of might that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do think even in that scenario, you'll have some people who can't work out at exactly the same time every single day. But just to feed off of the scenario you painted,
Yeah.
I think it's best if they can train together. I mean, I kind of saw this with the team that our gyms sent to semifinals, is like they're friends inside the gym and outside the gym. And what that does is build trust and camaraderie. That's super important because you, on a team of 4, you have to have trust, that in training someone's putting the work in. Not that you have to see it necessarily all the time,
But it might help.
but it helps when you're like, okay, if I don't see this person in a training session, like I know they're getting it in at other time. Like you trust that they're doing the work necessary to get better, right? Or, if they're sick, they get sick and they take a couple of days off. You don't get into a situation where someone's sitting there like, man, so-and-so's being so lazy, this, that, and the other thing. Like you're not second guessing that person because you've built the trust and the equity with those people that it's like, okay, if they really don't feel, if they're not here, it's because they legit don't feel good and they need to like recover or whatever.
Yeah.
So that only helps by spending time together. In addition to that, it like kind of builds, like I said, that trust inside the workouts, right? So when you're in the line of fire, you have the trust that this person's going to pick me up if I need help, or when someone's really struggling, you learn their body language and stuff like that. And so then, because the worst thing can happen is inexperienced teams, you get into the line of fire, you get into competition, things don't go the way that it's planned, which by the way is a guarantee. It's gonna happen, and you'll have teams that are like having a full-on conversation on the floor because they don't know what to do. Right? It's like, can you do this? I don't know. Do you need me to step in? I think so. 20 seconds gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Versus the teams that just know.
Exactly. Where it's like, you can tell the body language, and that person's able to just grab that person by the shorts or grab that person by the shoulder, move them out of the way and step up and do the work. And that the person being moved is like, okay, thank God, like someone stepped in and helped me. Right. And that takes time working together. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. Because
like,
sorry, not to cut you off. Like
no,
it's 2 things. Cause like, like you need, if you're the person who's getting pulled out of the way, you need to be like, know that it's okay that like you need to take some time to like get your crap together because you're like falling apart on the floor.
Right.
Like you basically need to take the time, and then like the other person, you need to know that you're like not hurting that person's feelings, or that like you're gonna like bruise their ego from that, and that it's gonna negatively impact the rest of the competition. Like even if you don't necessarily care about them as a person, like there's a lot of layers to it. And if like you have that experience and trust built up, like you're saying, like you get to the point where you don't need to have verbal communication about it anymore.
Exactly. And so I would recommend trying to train together all the time. When you're a ways away from the season, focusing on more individual training. Now there can be some crossover, right? Like if you have 2 people on the team that need to get better at squatting, maybe we're following the same squat cycle, right?
Yep.
And maybe we're squatting the same day.
And that kind of thing makes it easy, like organizing their like more conditioning based work too.
Exactly. And then maybe you say, okay, hey, we're going to once a week, we're going to throw down together to not as a team of 4, but against each other to kind of build, to get that push, right? Because, again, most of the people who are doing this as a sport are doing it because they like competing. Competing can kind of pull out an extra gear in them, right? And so maybe we say, all right, once a week we do that, and then, or once a week or once every other week we do that, and then once a week or once every other week we do a team workout to like stay sharp, right? So that's kind of what I would do. And then as you get closer to the season, you start to do more of that teamwork. And then if you're really in like the Rich Froning situation, then you do team of 4 competing workouts where it's like, okay, Now, instead of just competing against each other as individuals in one workout, we're doing 4 against 4 against 4, which is what Mayhem.
You're saying
do,
you're having multiple teams all running the same workout so that
correct.
you can see like how you're stacking up as a team versus other teams that are competitive.
Correct. And then and pushing each other, right? Yeah. Because now there's more of a race aspect to it than if it's just the 4 of you doing a workout.
Man, I never even thought about that. I mean, clearly I haven't thought about it because I haven't been on a team much. But like if you're an individual at an affiliate, for example, like we have a bunch of people and we all do the name game here together. And it's like, I know where I sit on all these different workouts because we've all gone max effort every Saturday for the last how many Saturdays. And I see where I stack up relative to other people. And I get to compare my scores against, the leaderboard that we have and like all that stuff. And it's like, I know where I'm at because I've seen it. Whereas like if you're a team, you might know where you're at individually on like all these different priorities that you have. But if you don't actually have the chance to like, let's call it like practice compete, so to speak, like a mock, like you're blind, like you don't know. Like, so you could actually sign up for a comp as like a mock-up comp, which would probably be maybe an okay option. But then it's like how many competitions are like team of 4 mixed pairs that's like actually competitive people? That's not the CrossFit game season. It's like very few.
It's super hard to find. Like I said, I competed on a team of 4 in Wadapalooza. That literally happened 1 year. We got lucky, right?
Yeah. And now does that even exist anymore? I don't think so, because
it's all team of 3 now.
3.
Well, and the only reason we went team of 4 was, those 2 awkward years that they did the sanctional model. Right. And so Wadapalooza had to do team of 4 because it was qualifying a team to the games.
Right.
And so then they weren't going to run an elite team of 4 and then everyone else team of 3. So everyone was team of 4. So that's why we did that. But yeah, it is hard. Now, if you're not in that rich phoning situation, but close to it, right? In the sense that you have 4 people who work at your gym who we can line up schedules, no problem, but we don't have that second team that we can compete against.
Right.
To like push each other and have an awesome session. You then got to look for a competition, probably 1 or 2 at least a year, just to like practice that. And we were fortunate the year I competed with a team for quarterfinals that same year, or not calendar year, but quarterfinals to quarterfinals, that 12-month window. There was a team of 4 competition in Maryland that was run by the Mid-Atlantic guys, the guys who run the MAC semifinal. They did something called MAC Fest, which the MAC guys got their start running team competitions. So the guy who ran it said, I wanted to get back to doing one. And so because of the name they had, it brought out some super competitive teams. Like we competed in a division that had a semifinal team, that had a team with an individual that went to semifinals, that had a team that had an individual that went to the CrossFit Games. And so it was a competitive competition. But you're right, those are hard to find. But if you're serious about it, you got to kind of at least try to search those out.
Yeah. And again, that's another thing where it's like, you need to be on the same page about like what you're willing to like travel for, what you're willing to spend on stuff. Like all that stuff has a cost to it, both like time, energy, but then like financial too. Like, man, yeah, it's important that you talk about that before that comes around and you're like, oh yeah, I don't got an extra $3,000 laying around to buy a hotel and fly to Madison or whatever, like that kind of thing. Super interesting. So let's say we're in comp prep with a team. How many workouts are you doing that are like sort of simulation, like in a week?
What? Okay, in a week.
Yeah. Again, let's say it's like a pretty ideal scenario. Again, like it's a bunch of coaches at an affiliate. They all have pretty free schedules. They're all pretty high level athletes individually. Like what might that look like in terms of like how often are they like doing something that looks like the sport?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're leading up to like semifinals as an example, like 2-3 times per week, probably. And a lot of it is, again, like if you're close and the workouts, you're going to want to hit those. But to keep it super broad, probably about 2-3 times per week.
Is that like a single MetCon, or are you like doing like pieces to it?
Well, I was just about to say it could be one, right? Or you could say, all right, we're going to do 2 days, but one of these days we're going to do 3 workouts in a day.
Yeah.
there's that aspect too. And so there's a balancing act there. Like most high level teams right now, leading into a competition might do like if you're going to semifinals, you're probably going to do a mock semifinals, for about 4 weeks out, right? Just to like prepare for
Mm,
that demand. But yeah, doing something where it's like, all right, hey, we got 3 hours, right? Let's hit 3 workouts or 2 workouts. I think that's something I would definitely recommend. Now, like I said, maybe hitting it 2-3 days a week. I would not do that 2-3 days a week where you're doing, 2-3 workouts in a row.
yeah.
Um, but if you're going twice a week, maybe you do a workout or two one day, do 2 to 3 the next day, or not the next day sequentially, but the other day
Yeah.
that you're doing that. And then the rest of the week is priority stuff. I think that would suffice for most.
Yeah. And I think that's a little different than, I think it is a little different than like an individual where it's like, if you did like 2 to 3 MetCons that were like a, you know, semifinal style tests for an individual, you could be like super trash from that. And not that you couldn't program it where for a team workout where like, you could make everybody trash because you can write anything to have everybody
Of
laying on the
course,
floor. It's like
of course.
put 4 echo bites in the floor. Everybody does 100 calories per time. It's like, you know, add up all your times. Like, great, you got everybody laying on the floor. But like, I feel like more of the time in team competitions, like, again, you might have somebody who's at capacity, but like you're often more in like a threshold type effort,
Yeah,
where you can still kind of communicate and stay synced up with things. It's less like just like truly up against your capacity.
yeah, a lot. You'll have workouts that are long where all 4 people have to work at one time, right? Like there was again, I keep referencing the one team that was from our gym, but it's an easy reference for me, right? They did a workout at the Vegas semifinal that I don't remember the exact format, but it was basically just like a bunch of like either worm squats or worm thrusters with burpees over the worm, right? And you sequentially moved it up. And so
Yep.
all 4 people are working at one time for the entire workout. They also did like a really long run where like you have to hold on to a rope and all 4 of you were running, right? And that's everyone working together. So those are going to exist and those are going to happen. And so you have to have 4 people that have the capacity to do stuff like that. But I would say the vast majority of workouts have rest built in,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's like a waterfall style where like you go, then I go, and you do a whole workout, and then I go do a whole workout, right? There's no interval style rest there. But in order for it to occur at a competition, right, that whole workout can't take an hour, right?
Right.
So it's not like you're doing a 20-minute workout. You might be doing like a 4 or 5 minute section and then the next person goes, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, it's definitely more I forget the exact word, threshold based than capacity based.
Yeah.
Capacity really comes in obviously for the recovery across an entire weekend.
Mm. Yeah. I think that, again, I think an event organizer who knows what they're doing and they have, teams that are quality that they can kind of play with things and enough events where they can play with things. It's like, okay, then you can, structure some events where individuals are going to be taxed up against their capacity. Other times where communication breakdown is going to be more of the thing that kind of pulls the teams apart, where again, they have to, whatever, like there's different qualities that they can kind of individually pull on. We're going to get more of that at a higher level competition where there's more events to play with and pull from. Um, man, but yeah, I think that for people who are just, I don't know, quality, not, I don't want to say call them middle of the road, but like a solid competitor, like you are going to see a lot more stuff where, yeah, they're all working. It's all pretty taxed, but it's not like max effort every time.
Yeah, and it is different, right? Because you could go into an individual competition and look at a workout and start to game plan how you're going to pace and strategize and break. But when going into a team competition, like you have to think about more people than just yourself. Like it's fully possible that you'll come out of a workout and not feel too bad, right? Because let's say it's a workout that is a lot of upper body pulling gymnastics, let's just say, and you have someone on your team that is they're just not good at it, right?
Yeah.
And you're friggin' awesome at it, right? Well, then you're not going to be tested in your capacity at anywhere close to that, right?
Yeah. However, they could be screwed, like not, they could be like trash for that, basically.
Exactly.
Right. And then that has to play into how you pace.
Correct. So you could come out of a workout like, I'm not going to be too tired from this. And then like, how do we strategize future workouts, or is there a spot I can pick up the slack? You know, I talked about the Mid-Atlantic competition I did, you know, that competition had a workout that had, I think it was toes to bar, worm push press, and rope climb. Right. And I was much better than my female partner on the toes to bar and the rope climb, because those are movements that I'm fairly good at. And so where, you know, you could only go as fast as your partner on the toes to bar because they were sync. But it was like, hey, let's keep pushing, because when we get to the rope climbs, I'll do 2 to 3 rope climbs per one for you, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I could make up for my strengths. Conversely, there was a workout that had 135-pound thrusters, and my female partner was way better at those than I was, right? And so those things are going to happen, and you're only as fast in some workouts as your slowest athlete. And then inside some of those workouts, you have to figure out, okay, if I'm good at this, I have to kind of make up for the deficiencies of my partner. Where can I do that?
Yeah. All right. Last question for you. So we've alluded to this just in conversation, but we haven't directly talked about it. Like the demands of a team CrossFit athlete are a little bit different just in terms of like physiology than an individual athlete, like a little bit more interval based, like the stuff that is super long. If you're someone who's pretty good at that, like you might be limited more based on like a teammate, because you're probably all working at the same time with something longer. So it is a little bit more maybe power based, a little bit more interval based. Do you like think about that when you're writing programs, or is that just sort of like you write stuff that is indicative of like what's going to be tested, and then that's just a result of that? Is it like a chicken or the egg type thing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think if I'm writing a program for someone, the first thing I'm going to look at is what they're not good at, right? Because I do think a high power athlete is going to succeed, have a higher ceiling in team than an individual.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see sometimes some of the strongest dudes like are on the team side. Yeah, they're on the team side, right? Or like you know, you see these guys and they just like crush weights, or the sprint workouts, they're just animals. And you know, because that's naturally where their physiology goes. And so that's definitely something I think about, but I might think about and structure it more deliberately the closer you get to the competition. Whereas earlier in the year, it's like, okay, well, just what are you not good at? Let's focus on those things, right? What do we need the most time to get better at?
Yeah. And the lens that you're looking at it through is like, what are you not good at? Not relative to individual CrossFit, but relative to team CrossFit.
Correct.
Because that's your sport, is team CrossFit. It's not individual CrossFit. I guess you just got to separate the two.
Right. And you know, some of that's going to be movement based, right? Like you might not be good at ring muscle ups, whether it's team CrossFit or regular or individual CrossFit, right? So let's work on those.
Right.
But then there might be some things, you know, that you want to play with in team CrossFit that you don't have to in individual. Like, how do you cycle your toes to bar? You know, there are some people that have a really short kip and toes to bar. Some people have a really long kip. And it's like, if you don't have the ability to change how you kip, you might have a really hard time syncing up with someone.
Yeah,
exactly. And so trying to work some of those things in is important. I don't know if that's something you have to do all year long, depending on the athletic ability of the athlete you're working with.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
Cool. Hey man, thanks for doing this. I learned a lot today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just found the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while and enjoying what you're hearing, I would encourage you to leave a rating or review for the show. It would definitely help us out. And lastly, if you're someone who does take your fitness seriously and cares about your performance deeply, I would encourage you to look into hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.